Welcome back to another episode of Performance Talk. And without further delay, because I know you all been waiting for him and y'all asked for him, Bryson is back. Bryson, how was the Canadian GP for you? I already know travels were pretty damn hectic. If you want to tell people about that, that's cool. But how was it overall for you? Because it was a mixed weather day there too.
Oh yeah, I mean, so if people want to hear about a 7.5 hour delay coming out over here, we can talk about that. I personally prefer to focus on the more positive parts of the weekend,
Right.
which is essentially everything else.
Damn.
This was actually my first time going to a Grand Prix outside of the US. Right?
Oh,
All the races I've been to previously were in Indianapolis, or we have Miami now,
right.
or Coda. Right, is really the places where I've been historically. So this is my first flavor of actually going to a track outside of the US. There's the issue of sort of getting across customs and things, and doing all the passport work, which was fun. But I did it. It was fine. Nothing to report there. But actually getting to the Circuit de Gilles Villeneuve and seeing what that track is like, it's a street track, and there's so many things about it that I've always kind of liked.
Okay.
But I didn't really have context for what I was looking at until I was actually physically there.
Okay.
It genuinely is a sort of a city park type of circuit where it genuinely is a park with like trees and wildlife and like not rivers, but like lakes and boats and all these things like you would normally have at a park.
Okay.
But on a certain weekend of the year, you put barriers up and you get the marshals in their posts and you run a Grand Prix. And all these things that I had seen historically, you go under a bridge, when you're going to a certain part of a chicane, and you've gone under this bridge a bunch of times and you thought about it and the way the circuit is laid out. When you actually get there, you realize it's actually like a pedestrian bridge and there's like cars going across, and you can actually recognize where that actual bridge is and what its context is in the sense of actually getting to the circuit. What I really like about it is because it's so sort of long and straight, there's a big part of the track where you can go from one side of the track to the other very easily, back and forth across some bridges. There's some water in the middle, but it's actually very easy to go one way or the other across the circuit. And by the end of the weekend, I could figure out exactly where I was going. I knew exactly where to go. I said, "Follow me. I'll show you where to go to the spot." And it's not, it's becoming a tour guide. So it's not just a question of what does the circuit look like, and seeing these famous corners that we've known for a long time, the hairpin and everything else, but actually seeing in person, seeing the cars drive there. And as you mentioned, there's a range of weather conditions as well. Yes, it is true that a rain-soaked day like Saturday that is completely miserable from a fan perspective in terms of the actual being in the rain is great for Formula One. It's great for racing. It's great for photography. And I can tell you that qualifying session when I was out there, I was standing at the exit of turn 2. I was on the edge of my non-seat. I was standing, but I was on the edge of my toes watching that. And it was great because we didn't know what was going to happen. People were going off. I was able to get some great videos. So overall, it was a wonderful time. And then just to finally add on top of that, there's this experience of being at a Grand Prix weekend where you're surrounded by fellow Formula One fans. It's something that's very unique. It's a unique atmosphere in terms of daily sort of life experiences. But this was kind of different. This was the first time where I actually went to a place and people knew that I was going to be there. I was actually able to see people there that I sort of interact with in the online space, and actually put a face to a name and have interactions there directly. And there were some really cool conversations and things that came out of that. So overall, it was a very, very positive weekend.
That is cool as hell, man. So then you are more qualified than I to answer this question, which I got several times on comments in my live post the Canadian GP. Some people say the Canadian GP is not a street circuit. It is a track on an island. What do you say from being there in person? Because you actually got to also walk the track, correct?
I did, yeah. I kind of broke some rules a little bit. Yeah. So I had not. So we actually know that that's a slightly tongue in cheek because they were already planning for people to walk the track, but the way in which it actually works is quite complex. And to be able to get as close to the podium as we were able to get, you had to know sort of where they were going to open the gates from. Right. Gotcha. So I wasn't trying to get through a marshal post and like squeeze through and awkwardly kind of get through there and fall, publicly. That's not that wasn't my plan.
Got you.
They ended up opening the barriers near the Wall of Champions at the final chicane. And we
Oh,
sort of went
plenty
there,
to talk
sort of
about that.
ran down to where the start finish line is. But
Okay.
yeah, I do understand this idea of a street circuit versus another circuit, because traditionally when people think of street circuits, what they think of is a taking over of public streets in the sort of the mainland of an area,
Right.
in sort of cordoning off a part of the city with sort of right angle corners and things, and then you drive through there, sort of like a traditional like IndyCar style, street circuit. That's what
Right.
you mean by street circuit. But actually, there's an entirely different type of street circuit that is taking place not so much on public roads. It's still public roads, but not regularly trafficked roads. It's
Okay.
actually sort of one of those like sort of city park type of things,
Okay.
where the roads there aren't always used every day. Well, they are used every day, but not necessarily for the type of traffic that you're normally thinking of.
Right.
It's a park. It's already sort of a dedicated section of land that is
Right.
actually perfect for hosting races and things, because you can just isolate the entire island. It's actually very similar to how Miami is, believe it or not, because Miami was traditionally thought of as a street circuit as well. In a way, it is. But the
Right.
reality is that entire campus of the Hard Rock Stadium is kind of in its own block. You're
Not
not actually
exactly.
driving on regular streets anywhere in that circuit. That actually is what really made the Miami Grand Prix feel a lot more like a traditional circuit than anything else, because the road was laid down, on top of this area. There were actually some slight elevation changes, although people couldn't quite see that. But as far as Canada goes, I can understand people that would say it's not a street track.
Right.
I think I understand what they're getting at, but I think technically it still counts as a street track in the sense that there's not a tremendous number of runoff areas, and if you go offline, you're liable to hit the wall.
Yeah.
I remember that Yuki Tsunoda had a bit of a snap on the exit of one of the chicanes, and then
Right.
later on, when I was doing the track walk, I could actually see that specific part of the track where his tire hit it, and the rubber was just still there.
Oh, cool.
So it's actually a very cool thing, and as I said before, doing a track walk gives you some perspective you don't really have. I'll give you a great example of this. On the exit of the turn 3, turn 4 chicane,
Okay.
it's like you have the normal, left-hander, right-hander of the 1 and 2, and there's a short little blast to this sort of right-left chicane. You remember where Sebastian Vettel went off in that sort of famous one in 2019. The exit of that chicane is actually pretty downhill. It's actually more downhill than it looks on television, because when the camera's looking, the camera's already looking down anyway. So it's difficult to get a real perception of what the elevation change is. But the exit of turn 4 is actually downhill, and it actually makes a lot more sense when you see drivers slamming against the side of that wall and just accelerating so hard out of that corner. You're like, why are they going so fast, so quickly there? Part of the reason is because it's downhill. And then you see that log turn 5, which is completely flat out and very, very fast, which is a very cool thing to walk. And then I actually saw turn 6 and turn 7, that very slow chicane after that. I saw that from the stands in the beginning of the race and got some cool footage from there. So there are any number of things that you can learn from doing an actual track walk. I have more to talk about, especially when you talk about the long back straight, but I think you had another question, so we'll get to that first.
Okay, so we do have a segment here. We're going to start introducing members of the channel, get to ask or pose questions that I will pick from to ask our special guests or our Wolfpack fam, like Bryson. Bryson is not a guest. Like, Bryson is family by now. You know what I'm saying? It's just like I'm the last cousin, because he got a lot of things going on. So 2 questions only, people. I picked 2 questions. Those 2 lucky people are: first, Jason Woodward would like to ask Bryson this: could Merck's car development without the side pods be the reason for porpoising bouncing issues, possibly distributing the downforce in an unbalanced manner?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to address that question is to look at other cars on the grid, right? Look at other cars on the grid with entirely different side pod concepts. Forget no side pod. Think about wide pod. Think about wide pod. We think about Ferrari. We think about Haas. We think about some other cars.
Aston Martin.
Aston Martin has historically had some porpoising issues, but it's gotten a bit better.
Okay.
And we do have an informal ranking of teams and where we think the porpoising issues are.
Okay.
But the simple logical fact of the matter is those teams experience porpoising to a high degree. That's just a fact, right?
Right.
Those teams don't have 0 pod side pods, right?
Right.
So clearly it can't be the case that simply adopting a wider side pod design will fix the inherent issues with porpoising. Now, just to be clear, that's not to say that having a a weirdly loaded side pod and floor arrangement can't contribute to an issue and make it more difficult to tame and make the setup window, razor thin, that certainly could be a contributing factor. But it can't be the case that if we simply adopt some other team's side pod design,
Hmm.
it will magically solve all porpoising problems. They will still be there because
Okay.
teams that had went in an entirely different direction still have them.
Right. Right. Okay. Good question. Good answer. As always, the answer was never going to be the question. Next person is Na Altamain Tanny. And actually, they are from Canada. They made sure to say that. Total said the porpoising is solved. Was that your impression? Do you agree with some who say that the request from Merck to the FIA to do something about the porpoising has backfired?
No, I don't think anything's backfired because the idea of backfiring suggests that there's some sort of strategic play here. You're trying to produce a certain outcome to your advantage. I think a better way to read the situation is the car was being run in a situation where drivers were being subjected to over 10G. I've heard informally there were even peaks of up to 16G
What?
at times in Baku, not explicitly because of
Damn.
porpoising, but because of bouncing issues, and that is an unsustainable situation to have. It simply is not the case that the decisions that were being made are done to achieve a certain outcome. I mean, I don't even care. I said several times, drivers are not expendable,
You
right?
have.
I am not willing to trade temporary performance of a slow car for potentially permanent injuries or physical damage to drivers, especially not Lewis Hamilton. Okay,
Yeah, you have
someone who
taken
is
that stance.
going above and beyond to work with experimental setups and carry sensors and do all these things
Yeah.
to allow the team to learn something about what the car that they've actually built can do. That's just not an acceptable situation. So frankly, I don't care what the consequences are for the championship. My number one
Mm.
priority is preserving driver safety. We can talk about the details of how those things are being implemented and making sure they're being done in a fair and equitable way. That's certainly something we can talk about. But no, I don't think it's a sort of a backfiring question.
Okay.
But really quickly on the idea of porpoising, I think there is an important distinction to be made between porpoising and bottoming or bouncing, or I've even heard it called planking, which is I
Flanking.
find
Yeah.
a much more fun description of it, porpoising versus planking. And
Another
the
key word.
porpoising issue kind of is an inherently sort of an aeromechanical thing that
Okay.
requires the floor to stall or to lose downforce and cause the car to sort of jump up, and
Hmm.
it will sort of reattach the flow once it's up there, and then it gets sucked down again, and they go up and down at more or less a constant frequency. That type of a phenomenon is a high speed phenomenon, and
Okay.
it can occur in principle in a perfectly smooth surface. It's not
Facts.
inherently caused by the bumps being there. It can certainly be exacerbated by the bumps because you're sort of dynamically changing the ride height, and that can cause the floor to stall and do some weird things. But that's one question. That's the question that Toto and others seem to believe that they've solved that particular issue. But
Okay.
an entirely separate question is this question of bottoming or planking, which is more about suspension itself. And that could actually happen at any speed. And that actually has to do with the car being run at a low ride height and at a very stiff suspension setup
Suspension setup.
over an uneven surface,
Right.
right? So how does your car handle going over uneven surfaces? What's the damping? What's the effective stiffness? How much travel do you have in your suspension? It doesn't
Right.
even matter if you have a relatively soft suspension. If you run out of travel,
You
and
just gonna
effectively your
bottom.
stiffness becomes infinite because you've run out of travel and suspension.
Right.
And we're still, you're going over the surface, and if it's uneven, you're just slamming across the ground. And if the car can't navigate that uneven surface effectively, you can very easily get extremely high accelerations. And so my understanding of what, at the very minimum, of what Mercedes is saying, their position is that they believe that the porpoising issue is sort of the classical issue of the floor stalling and then the car jumping up and reattaching and that sort of cyclical thing. They believe they have a handle on that, and they believe they've had a handle on it since Spain. What they've been suffering more from is this bottoming and this sort
Okay.
of planking issue that really has to do with the surface being uneven, and their problems they seem to be becoming worse with that.
Okay.
The good news is that, again, there are ways to modulate the setup of the car to kind of improve that, and raising the ride height is one of the things that you can do. I know, there are some statements that Toto said about that raising the ride height wouldn't do anything. The way I
Right.
interpret that statement is not that it wouldn't do anything, it's that potentially the sensitivity of porpoising tendency or bouncing tendency as a function of ride height is actually not severe enough, and the amount of travel that they had to work with was small enough that even if you raise the ride height to the maximum level, it wouldn't be enough to effectively fix the problem. Right?
Right.
That's different
You
from
spoke
saying
to
that
that.
raising the ride height doesn't do anything. It's more
Right.
like saying within the range that we could actually raise it, it wouldn't actually fix the problem.
Fix the problem.
Now, again, I'm not going to put words in his mouth. And I don't know exactly what he said, but that's how I sort of interpreted it. What I
Okay.
do know is that there was that FIA directive that was sort of tried to be put into effect for Montreal. It was
Right.
later pushed back to another race. That essentially all they really care about is not necessarily explaining is it being caused by porpoising, is it being caused by bottoming. The bottom line is what's your vertical acceleration, right?
That's
The,
what it
the
was.
acceleration is actually what causes damage to the drivers. That's all we really care about. And in principle, they're interested in finding a way to measure that acceleration over the course of qualifying or the race or whatever it is, and
Okay.
just keep it within reasonable levels. There's some
Okay.
details there that we can work out, but broadly speaking, that's what they're going to do. And I support that. As I said, my number one priority
Definitely.
is driver safety, broadly speaking.
Definitely. You have always spoke to driver safety, like plenty of times we've had conversations, and driver safety always seems to be paramount to you. And you definitely you haven't moved from that, and I don't ever think you're gonna move from that. It's just a good human being that you are. So
Well, just to be clear, there are ways for that explanation to be abused to leverage power in a way that doesn't make sense. I'll give you a good example. If you're going to set a vertical acceleration limit for the cars, it
okay,
needs to be done based on medical science and the opinion of doctors on what a human being can reasonably experience before suffering injury. It should
okay,
not be based on a sort of, post hoc sort of, looking at the data, seeing which teams can get below an extremely low porpoising level, far below than you really would need for safety reasons, and then setting the level right above that level and saying anyone who can't get that, you're going to be penalized.
you
That would be a mistake, and that was something I would
okay.
not support.
That I'm glad you put that in context because I don't think that would be considered enough, and that is very true. And I think that's the best way you keep it like from being biased at any fashion. Like this is more about the drivers, not about assisting said teams or crippling other teams, which has been like the talk of the town on all type of platforms. So now let's get into this. I was I popped the bottle for Merck making a podium. You were there. Do you think the outcome for Mercedes in Canada was due partially to the inconsistency in weather and the mix up of the grid? And of course, Lewis making the pole position and maybe have a strategy? Or do you think it was more attributed to Mercedes is progressing with this W13 and actually getting closer and closer to where they might have wanted to be in the beginning?
Yeah, I do think they're getting closer. I do think they're making progress. There's no question that the tire degradation characteristic for Mercedes was seemingly different than it was for Ferrari or for Red Bull. I think the tire deg actually looked reasonably pretty good on the W13 actually over the course of the race. But you're the strategic and race options available to you improve dramatically the better your qualifying is, right? The real thing that really kicked off all of the opportunities that were brought in this particular race was a good qualifying. Qualifying Lewis was almost P3 for a minute there before
Right.
he was pipped to it by I think it was Alonso. No, Alonso got up there, but he was close to being P3. Um, that and George was much further down the pack. George had a great race, but even with his great race, he was still quite a bit behind Lewis in the end. And that's kind of a reverse of what we've seen previously, where Lewis was back starting off, in a poor position and then having to sort of rise through the grid. And it just takes time and skill and patience to do that. And it really limits your chances in the Grand Prix. I think Mercedes has built
It
an
was
under
same.
an undercooked design. They've had an ambitious design, but a
Undercooked.
design that they didn't fully understand on day one and weren't able to deliver on day
Okay.
one, which is not necessarily all their fault. I'm sure it's partially, but I mean, this is what it's always been. Regulation changes have always posed more of a threat to a team's dominance than rival teams. It's always been that way. And
Yeah.
of course, they're held back by the cost cap and sliding scale things and all the stuff we're already familiar with. What I would say is, I think they are learning something, and I
Okay.
think the both the physical pain and the metaphorical pain that the drivers have been going through in order to run experimental setups, in order to run
Right.
weird sensors on their cars and static pressure taps and all these things to help Mercedes learn something, that that pain is temporary in
Okay.
terms of trying to run these sensors and things,
All right.
but the knowledge gleaned from that is permanent. So
That
if
is
you if
true.
you if you if you run something that causes your car to be slow right now, the knowledge that you learn from that could actually help you be fast indefinitely in the future. So I definitely think that they're making progress. Ferrari and Red Bull are not standing still. What I would
Right.
say is that we're learning more about what the actual issues of the car are. As you mentioned, they believe they solved the porpoising issue, but that sort of revealed sort of a bottoming or planking issue. Well,
Okay.
if they understand that now and have a better grasp of what that is and what the inherent limitations of their sort of suspension design are, well, maybe they can figure out what tracks they'd be good at. Tracks they would be good at, maybe a very high speed circuit, maybe with not too hard braking, but with a very smooth surface, something like
Yeah.
that. That's Silverstone. No, that's that we're talking about Silverstone. Okay,
Oh,
so even if there weren't an upgrade package planned for the W13 for Silverstone, which there is, even if there weren't, based on what we already know about this car already, Silverstone would actually be a much better track for them in terms of replicating the type of race pace that they showed in Spain. It's almost one of those weird quirks of history where the one race where we really thought the true pace of the W13 was truly revealed,
mhm.
that was the one race where Lewis found his way back 30 seconds behind the grid, and all that pace was sort of absorbed into getting back to a reasonable position. And again, this is a question of luck and changes. Lewis and Kevin Magnussen came together, and Lewis got a puncture that's very unlucky. It's
Yeah.
actually even more unlucky than people realize because George Russell and Sergio Perez also came together in
Right.
turn two at Spain, and neither got a puncture. It just carried on. It's just the luck of the draw, right?
Yeah.
So I'm very, very excited to see what Mercedes brings to the table in Silverstone. I'm also very excited to see a large number of members of the F1 community going to Silverstone and sort of interacting with each other in a hopefully positive way.
Positive.
We'll see
Yeah.
how it goes.
Yeah, let's hope for that. We got a lot of negativity out here in that right now. Like, just everybody treat people just right. That's all you got to do is just treat people right. Point blank, period. So you talk about the package of Mercedes. Now, we were going to get into this much later, but you open the door. What do you think that package may consist of? Like, from your analyst standpoint, what do you think that package may consist of?
No, I don't think I have enough information to say what they're going to do, because the thing is, they've seen what their own design is. They've seen what the weaknesses of their own design potentially are in terms of setup. And they've also seen what other teams are doing, right?
Right.
Now, I certainly don't think that Silverstone is a race where we would see a fundamental change in philosophy of the car, but
Okay.
we might see meaningful changes to the floor or to
Okay.
the guide vanes in front of the inlet, and certainly making modifications in wings. I think Ferrari showed us the last time out, both in Baku and in Canada, that they are willing to sort of explore the different parts of the design space, maybe sacrifice a little bit in absolute downforce numbers to get a little bit of reduction in drag and get a car that's kind of similar to Red Bull, because historically, as the season's progressed, the form guide has been Red Bull is immensely fast on the straights, not absolute maximum downforce.
Yes.
Ferrari has incredible downforce, incredible on the brakes, incredible in the slow speed corners, but maybe not the same top speed. And we're starting to get to a situation where, especially these reasonable few tracks that have been more higher speed, where Ferrari started to explore that. Now, again, there was an especially low downforce wing that they used in Baku, and the slightly higher downforce wing that was used in Canada. And it's not only the question of differences in circuit configuration that was driving that.
Yeah.
As I said before, it's actually a shift in philosophy of how Ferrari wants to run their cars in the future. Even if you had done everything exactly the same for another race, if they were to rerun it again, they might do it with a slightly different rear wing, a little bit less drag, well, actually quite a bit less drag, but a little bit less downforce. So trying to improve that aerodynamic efficiency.
Okay. So getting into Ferrari, man, My take on it, and I'll let you give your take first. I'll ask this question: is Ferrari failing their drivers, or are their drivers more failing Ferrari? Because at this point in time, to me, it seems like Ferrari is failing their drivers. At first, Sainz was wrecking up Ferraris, and I was like, damn it, Sainz, you're killing it. And then, then we started creeping into Imola, where Charles made a very critical mistake and cost himself some points where he might have been a little bit closer now in this championship fight had he just took the Prost approach, is what I call it, and don't do any more than you have to at this point and lose everything you have. But now it seems like the cars are unreliable. We've seen Ferrari power units failing across the grid in different teams. I felt like I think it might have been lap 40-ish, where they caught a back glimpse of Charles's car. It seemed like that it was just a bit of smoke coming out. I was like, I don't know if something's burning off, or is it just you get a new motor, things burn off, and maybe get some of that. So what is your take on this? Ferrari starting to fail their drivers and cripple Charles's championship fight.
It does seem to be a shift in culpability as the season has gone on. Early on, Ferrari seemed to be rather bulletproof, and in fact, I remember their testing the car was absolutely bulletproof. Almost no issues mechanical wise to speak of whatsoever. They were incredibly good, and it seemed to be the drivers that were not quite converting good qualifying positions into race positions. But more recently, yeah, there have been some issues with Ferrari in terms of reliability. And I think the worst part about it is they're not all power unit issues. Carlos Sainz's issue in Baku was actually allegedly a hydraulics issue. And it actually, or maybe it may even been called like a brake by wire issue, where there was an issue that was not supposed to be explicitly about the engine, but maybe it was gearbox or something. But yeah, these have been situations where points have been lost, and I guess that the challenge is it's not just that they didn't finish the race. Not finishing the race is the worst possible outcome. Right. A better outcome would have been sensing a serious problem and then modifying your driving like aggressively just to be able to finish the race, kind of like Mercedes was forced to do in Spain. Right. They had to do a completely different strategy for getting their cars home because they had a very specific type of failure. It wasn't a generic one, it was a very specific one. And that actually allowed them to really convert their points into the maximum they could really get at the time instead of retiring out of the race. The issue with the Ferrari thing seems to be that these failures aren't giving enough precursor in terms of warning. Gotcha. They're just sort of happening and they're caught completely off guard. And that's the thing that's kind of frustrating about them. The only other thing, of course, is the strategic blunder in Monaco. That was probably more than one issue. I'm sure that if we've talked about this ad nauseum already, but there are ways in which Ferrari could have reacted to that situation that would have been better than they did, and they lost the win because of it. So yeah,
big facts. All right, so I remember Ferrari saying, man, like they weren't concerned with doing anything because they were already sitting in the seat. And I specifically remember BRYSON taught me that if you're not moving in Formula One, you're getting passed. You can't stand still. You can't think that what you have is good today is going to be good tomorrow. I specifically watched, I watched, of course, but I specifically took note of the last few laps, 10 laps or so, with Sainz. Clearly, I felt he should have had an ability or the pace, having DRS, to eventually give Max more of a push or even overtake him. I watched Sainz for maybe 10 laps with DRS consistently through that time, unable to overtake Max. So is this going to be due to the fact that Ferrari power units have kind of stalled at a certain point with this top speed and the packages you talked about? Or is this going to be more about if those drivers were swapped, seeing Charles come from the back of the grid and manage to get fifth? If Charles is in that position behind Max, things change. So are we talking about driver ability, or are we talking about mechanically the car just did not have it in it to give Sainz the opportunity to overtake Max?
Yeah, so I think there's two things to point out. One is the strategic use of the energy recovery system, the electrical deployment. If you know that there's only one or two spots in the track where you can possibly be overtaken, you save all your energy for that, and you make it extremely hard to be passed. Number one, but number two, this is kind of like what we saw in Jeddah, right? With Charles trying to chase down Max, right? Mm-hmm. And he was probably faster. He was arguably faster, but couldn't pass in the spot where you really needed to because his top speed was just not high enough. This is we almost saw a little bit of it in Miami too. We were saying, you know, Ferrari with the DRS open cannot pass a Red Bull on a straight line. That is a speed differential between those cars. And it is actually the case that, you know, in the past, Ferrari's been like one of the slowest cars sometimes in the speed trap, and Red Bull's been like consistently one of the fastest. And if your speed differential to your rival is significant enough where you can't pass them with the DRS open when you have pace, it almost isn't worth having the pace.
Damn.
Right, you understand what I'm saying? Like, if you have the pace but you can't realize it to make an overtake, then there may not really be any reason to have it. And I think that's part of the reason why Ferrari is more open to this idea of shifting away from an ultra high downforce but slow speed car a little bit more towards a lower downforce but higher top speed car. Even if the theoretical lap time is slightly slower or maybe even neutral in the best case, they might go for that direction purely to improve their ability to overtake. Purely for the ability to overtake, not just in going through back markers and things, but the Red Bull has just been an incredibly slippery car. It's not just a question of, you know, drag being low, but also they have a very powerful power unit. Those things are going to be very difficult. And at the end of the day, if Ferrari wants to win, they're going to have to overtake a Red Bull on track at some point. So I think that they're seriously exploring the idea of cutting a bit of the downforce and cutting more of the drag in order to get more on terms with their primary rival, Red Bull.
Yeah, they're gonna have to do something, man. That Red Bull car is strong, bro. You know, Red Bull goes gun to a knife fight. It is strong. I think Max is evolving as a driver as well, learning some of the things that have been used to combat him, and then taking those bits and then using them to further his ability to make his way to this championship. So I give him credit for that. But I mean, the Red Bull right now seems like a strong car. But what's up with this Red Bull so-called clone? Like I said, I was going to give them 5 races to get a hold of this damn thing, and I still got like 3 more races left. So I'm not pushing the button on them, but it doesn't seem like a lot is progressing with Aston Martin. I'm disappointed with like 2 teams that I felt were going to do better this season. Seeing what happened last season, although we had a different platform, so it's like that should be negated. But I still felt like they would be doing better than they are, and that's McLaren and Aston Martin, and they just aren't at this particular juncture.
Yeah, I would add Williams to that mix as well. You know, don't forget Williams legitimately got a P2 last year in qualifying.
Facts.
You know, they actually genuinely were doing it. You know, it's kind of interesting. So first of all, the broader philosophical point is it's not enough to generically copy the concept of a car with slight tweaks here and there. It's not quite the same. It looks very similar, but it's not quite the same. Right. You know, Mother Nature knows the difference. There's the difference between right and almost right is vast in terms of aerodynamic development. And so if your car is operating on the ragged edge of flow separation and stall and wings and body elements that aren't working the way they're supposed to, if you deviate slightly from that, suddenly you have a flow separation and then you have an entirely different flow field available. You have nowhere near the same type of characteristics that another car has that looks to the naked eye almost identical, right? Very, very, very small changes can have a large impact on what the performance of a design is. Not to mention the fact that anytime you copy something from one car to another, you have to modify it anyway, just to make it work for your concept. You know, the inlet design for the radiators is very different for Aston Martin than Red Bull, and there's also some other differences near the back end of the side pods. But you know, I'm sure they're trying their best to pursue this new avenue of car development. But frankly, I'm not satisfied with the explanations that were given as to how and or why the car looks the way that it does. And the problem is that the official explanation given, it only deepened the confusion and the bewilderment. It didn't improve it. They're saying, actually, no, well, we had this because we built 2 cars. I'm like, what? You did what?
Right.
You had the time, energy, and ability to complete 2 different concepts and not pursue one of them. That's unbelievable. It strains incredulity. Okay. Now I'm sure that we'll learn more about this as time has gone on and people don't seem to be up in arms about it quite so much because of the performance deficit that you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still answers that I would like to have that I don't currently have.
Yes.
With regard to where their performance is, I think they also may have some track dependent issues as well, meaning that there may be certain types of circuits that suit them better than others. I'm not familiar enough with the Aston Martin to be able to say precisely what those track features are, but it wouldn't surprise me if they come out of nowhere in like a Hungary or some other track where you wouldn't necessarily expect them to be very good, but they actually come up with something. I do know that some teams are still struggling to meet the weight limit. So teams are trying to get that weight down. And, we've already said previously that the weight effect is something like, 0.3 of a second per 10 kilograms, and integrated over a race distance. This can be a lot. So weight's very important. You want to get down to the absolute minimum if you can get there. And if they're not there yet, then that's definitely one area they can pursue for an improvement in performance.
Okay. So let's talk about the FIA, which we talked briefly about them implementing these, I don't call them rules, but guidelines that they're trying to, and I did see in their statement, they did mention that they were going to get with their doctors and discuss some things. So I'm waiting to see a little bit more on that and see how that's going to go. But let's talk about the FIA and what I saw about as far as people feeling like they were influenced by Alpine when it came to Haas and orange black flagging Magnussen to come in on that front wing damage. Do you feel like maybe they influenced a bit, or FIA might have overreacted to pull Magnussen in, or no? I feel like they were totally correct in what they did for that little bit of damage, because I've seen the worse and I haven't seen them call orange black flag a car to come in. Like I haven't. So what do you think at this point in time?
Yeah, believe it or not, I actually still haven't watched the race back yet. I've had a very long weekend,
time, bro.
And I've had some schoolwork I've been working on to get ready for some stuff that I have going on there this week. So I actually still haven't watched the full race back yet.
Okay.
I've watched the highlights, but not the full race. And I can tell you, in my own experience, when I was actually watching the race and I saw Magnussen's damage, I actually did think he should be black flagged. And the reason for that is not so much because of how it's impacting his own car or whatever it is, but a piece like that comes off, and if it happens to come off like on the racing line at high speed and impact a driver in the head, that could be a serious problem because it's small enough to get through the gaps in the halo.
Gotcha.
Right, a tire would actually be a lot better for something like that. An entire wheel tire, something would be better because there's no way that can get through the smallest aperture in a halo.
Right,
it's going to bounce off in some sense and get somewhere. The front wing end plate is big enough to have some clout to it and potentially damage something, but also small enough where it could actually get in. But it's got pointy corners and things. I really didn't like that. I didn't even like Yuki Tsunoda's half broken rear wing in Baku.
You talking about the one they duct tape?
Yes, I am. rather famously. I thought that also should have been a blue flag question. They did bring him in eventually, and seemed to be okay with the combination of duct taping it, but also telling him not to use the DRS again. I think that was the second point that's critical. They told him not to use the DRS again, which is just as important as anything else. Right. As far as Alpine and influence, I mean, nominally, there shouldn't be any motivated reasoning for a team behind telling someone that someone else should be black flagged. If that exists, okay. I'm not thrilled with it, but it doesn't surprise me if that exists. Okay. As I said, I had only my subjective reaction and experience to this in real time as I was watching it, and I was thinking you should pit for that. You should get a new front wing because I didn't like the idea of that particular part of the car sort of flying off at high speed.
Right.
It's the type of thing that can injure a driver, even more so than a wheel being loose, frankly.
This is why Bryson is who Bryson is, because it makes total damn sense on that standpoint, because you're exactly correct. It has enough mass for itself, especially if it came in contact with a driver's visor. I don't know what the impact rating is on that, but still you're talking about the potential of driver safety, which he stands on. And he made a very good point. A tire would be better because, like you said, it's just going to deflect. It's not going to meet the driver per se more than the car. So yeah, that is a good point. So now with you saying that, I agree with I agree with that. I'm not opposed to changing my standpoint with legitimate information placed before me by Bryson and other people.
Well,
So, yeah,
and again, you can. I'm always willing to be reasoned out of a position. You just have to have good arguments.
Right,
so just
right.
bring me some new stuff, and we can definitely talk about it. But my position right now is I'm okay with the black and orange flag.
Okay, Red Bull. Are they being hypocritical? Are they, doing what Red Bull does as far as complaining about things, but then they have their own complaints they feel should be listened to? Is Red Bull the predominant team that seems to conduct themselves this way? Like, they had this thing about Mercedes. They complained about that, but then Christian wants to complain about the money and the cap. And then, so what is it with Red Bull? How do you see Red Bull as a team? Because even Christian admitted, like, if Toto was going to have Lewis and Russell complain, that is something I would totally do. I would totally do that. Although I don't think they did that, but if they did, anything's possible. I don't feel like they put themselves in that position. I feel like, Lewis was jacked up. Russell was complaining at the beginning of the season, but Christian said, "Yeah, I do that." Like, how do you view that? How do you view the hypocritical type?
There are at least three problems with this entire thing.
Okay.
The first thing is, we already know that the drivers in private are saying different things than they are in public.
Yes.
We know that there was a vote as to whether or not the teams thought that porpoising was an issue. There's only one driver on the grid that thought that it wasn't in that vote, and he wasn't a Red Bull driver.
No.
Okay. It was Fernando Alonso, in fact. But so we already know right off the bat that this is a real issue behind closed doors when there's no cameras or whatever. And the other question is, it's not just the Mercedes issue. It's an issue for all the teams. Kevin Magnussen was talking about having nerve damage. Carlos Sainz was having difficulty seeing. The mythology that only Mercedes has this issue is quite attractive to many, but it's based on fundamentally false assertions, right? Not only is Mercedes not the only team to deal with sort of like porpoising or bouncing issues, in many cases, they're not even the worst team. It's just like, in terms of vertical acceleration magnitude, okay, Haas and other teams have definitely been higher. Like, you have to be a little careful because it changes over a race distance. There's some variations there, and there's some people misunderstanding the difference between having bouncing in turns like 12 through 15 in Baku versus the actual maximum amplitude that the teams are experiencing on the long straight. I'll talk about that in the future if we get a chance, but those are the first two issues with that. Number one, it's not just Mercedes, but it also their drivers are doing things in private. But the third issue and the deeper and really the only consequential one of this is just stop for a second to think about the consequences of that thinking. Okay. Think about the potential injuries and damage that will be done by the assumption of disingenuous reporting of a driver's injuries. You're going to wait 2, 3, 4 years from now when a driver comes into the grid with a cane and a doctor's note showing his x-ray, showing that he had issues with their back. Well, then what? You're going to be impressed, and you're going to be, convinced at this point, oh, well, you're right. You know what? Actually, you were right. You had back issues. And I'm like, it's too late.
It's too late.
It's too late. They already have injuries. It's too late. I don't care if you're convinced now, right? We need you to. I don't care if you're convinced when it's obvious. You need to be convinced now when you can still do something about it. So first of all, don't tell your own drivers to play things up and pretend things aren't as serious as they are when it's a safety issue, number one. But number two, just consider the consequences of that thinking. The consequences of not reacting accordingly now can extend indefinitely into the future. And as I said before, I am not willing to sacrifice drivers' health for car performance. I'm just not going to do it. So no. The answer is no. Don't. I'm not going down that path, and I don't think we should even entertain that idea, regardless of who says it. No.
It says no. Hey, so did you hear anything about the 2026 deal? Red Bull, Volkswagen, Porsche engines. What are you feeling about that? What are you feeling about Porsche coming in, as far as, they're coming in kind of like two different ways, but it was talking about where they were going to partner up with Red Bull, but They're going to use Red Bull powertrains, and the Volkswagen's going to use, that. So how do you feel about that whole combination coming together 2026? I mean, it's some ways away, but it's still a future development that I know people would take into consideration as far as the grid, because these cars are going to be getting better as time goes. I hope for next season to be better technically, mechanically, fundamentally with all teams, so that we as like enthusiasts, people that like to watch or love this sport. Like I tell people all the time, like, yes, I favor Mercedes. Yes, I like Lewis. He's one of the greatest. Who doesn't like a great? I favor other drivers as well. But as a whole, the sport is important, and I want to see it progress all together so that when I watch it, I'm still marveled at everything that can be done, from strategies to cars to pit crew to damn all the mechanics they're included. So if that doesn't happen, it's like, what am I watching it for? It's not growing, it's not progressing, it's not evolving. So how do you feel about that possibly happening? Porsche coming in, intermingling with Red Bull and other teams responding to it.
Yeah, I too, I find myself in a similar position where I am a fan of Mercedes, and I am certainly a fan of Lewis Hamilton, but I am mostly a fan of Formula One, sort of writ large. This weird human endeavor that we're kind of a part of. It's really
Right.
an international circus, frankly, where engineers and athletes are competing against each other on the world stage. It's really a kind of an incredible thing that human beings do. But I do want it to progress, and then again, I do expect there to be convergence over time as we sort of figure out what the wrong solutions are and converge more on highly developed right solutions. That's definitely going to happen. And I think eventually the time will come when these current generation cars are actually faster than the 2020 cars. Mm-hmm. And the reason why I say that is because the downforce potential for a ground effect floor is higher than a flat bottom floor.
Facts.
And so despite everything else that's going on, the potential exists in the future once we get way down on the weight limit and take care of some other things, for some really, really fast lap times to come out of these cars. So I'm looking forward to that. With regard to Volkswagen, Porsche, and things, these deals are definitely happening. Okay. Entries are definitely coming in the sense of partnerships with existing teams and maybe buyouts of existing teams. Frankly, what I want is new teams, though. Okay. I'm not interested in a new pathway for IP or for a rebadging or remanagement of existing teams. Okay. I want more teams on the grid than 10. I want more teams on the grid because it makes the racing more complex. It adds more variables to the races and even qualifying and other things. But also, it not only provides new jobs for drivers, it also provides new jobs for engineers, for tacticians, for mechanics, for HR people and personnel that work in the factories, the people who build the factories. There's an entire ecosystem that can be improved and sort of grown as a result of getting more teams into the sport. And frankly, some of the justifications that I've heard, both official and unofficial, for why certain entries have not been allowed access to the grid, for example, Andretti, have just been unsatisfactory. Frankly, they don't make sense in terms of logic, right? And they really don't seem to make sense in terms of empirical information and what the long-term growth strategy of Formula One is. This is an evolving discussion, and there's probably too many points to really get into it now. But suffice it to say, I want to see more teams on the grid than we currently have, and I support any effort to do that in a way that is, financially responsible and all that, and provable that it sort of can be beneficial. But in terms of specifics, right? In terms of Porsche, for example, partnering with Red Bull, there are open questions about bookkeeping and what is the definition of a new entry and what exceptions and allocations should be given to that new entry to develop the new engines. Right. We talk about the Red Bull powertrains engines that are in Honda's, or excuse me, they're in the AlphaTauri car, the Red Bull car. Right. But frankly, those are Red Bull powertrains engines in name only. Red Bull powertrains as an entity is still at a phase of doing like single cylinder tests of F1 engines this year. They don't build Formula One quality engines yet. The engines that are in these cars are designed, built, and maintained by Honda. They are badged Red Bull engines, but they are in every sense of the word Honda engines, except for names. So I think there does have to be a discussion to be had about what we mean by a new entry and how relationships work between teams that are, a hybrid of party entity that's been in the sport for a very long time and another part that's just like brand new. It's like, well,
Okay.
what is this thing that we've built? Is it new or is it old? I just hope people are being sensible. I don't know how reasonable an expectation that is, but I hope they can be sensible, and that's probably the best that I can hope for.
Well, what's a good number for you? More teams on the grid. Like, what do you think? Because like I run a fantasy football league, right? And I've been running for 5 years, and I found that 12 teams is like the ideal number of teams for a fantasy football league to have enough players available for teams to build a good team, and enough players available if teams have players to get hurt and go through the season and be competitive. I hit 14, it was just a bit too much. 10, it's too much out there to get a super teams. 12 was a sweet number. What would be a sweet number for a Formula One grid for you with more teams?
I think honestly that would actually be a good spot for me. 12. I think 15 seems a little bit tough, given the way that current things are. 13 still seems like it might be a little additional amount, but I probably could see it if there was enough interest for having those numbers of teams. Okay. But certainly 2 more certainly should be in the realm of new enough to see the benefits of what adding new teams can be. But also like a small enough number of new teams that it's not radically different from what they've had before. The argument has always been, well, do we have a pie and every team is taking a slice of the pie? If you add more teams, then you're going to decrease the size of each team's pie, the slice of the pie rather. Well, I don't think they realize that the entire pie itself will get bigger when you add more teams, especially teams from different places. I mean, if you had like a Chinese team and the U.S. team, and some other teams, or like a Brazilian team, I think there'd be massive influx of interest that there would be beyond what we already have. I mean, if you think that the Drive to Survive effect is powerful now, imagine if you had a Brazilian team with a Brazilian driver, an American team with an American driver, all the things that are there. I mean, there's more potential here than I think people realize. And as I said before, I've been wholly unsatisfied with the explanations that have been given for why some of these teams will not be granted entry. Right. I'm not going to assert right now that it is European exclusionism, because that's a strong claim to make, and I would have to have very strong arguments to say that. But at first glance, I'm not seeing the evidence. The arguments that are being given are not holding up to scrutiny in my view. And it's probably a discussion for a wider topic that we can get into at some other time.
To make sure I in context.
Yeah, but I do think that we need more teams on the grid, not just differently managed teams or new engine suppliers. I think we need all new constructors as well.
I agree. I completely agree, man. I completely agree. So listen, everybody, Bryson has come back, and thank for his time. Bryson has continued to grow, but as you see, doesn't change. Okay, he don't forget about the little people. He also doesn't forget about you all. Bryson, as far as and I know people want to know this, as far as your experience with being, I would say, drafted, like you're a first round draft pick, I would say drafted into the Formula space, how is it different for you? Has your perspective changed? Has your thoughts, have your feelings, have your connection with Formula One changed at all by being a bit more closer to the center of this sport versus where you were before that?
I mean, I've always really kind of looked at this as a learning exercise, right? It's always been the case that I've been passionate about this sport. It's always been the case that I've had things to say about it, but talking about it in a more structured way, in a more formalized way to sort of a wider audience, has really brought me into contact with people who have direct experience with something and can give me direct information and feedback on not only what I am perceiving as what's going on in the Formula One community, both technically and otherwise, but also things that they're seeing. I have contacts now, unnamed sources from various organizations that will give me some insight into how some of these things are actually working. How is CFD actually run in a team when you're trying to figure out how a car is cornering? How do you translate wind tunnel data that's in a straight line into cornering data? It's hard. It's not easy, and there's details involved in that people don't even think about. And as a direct consequence of being a communicator, I guess, or a public student of motorsport,
Yes.
I've gotten an opportunity to talk to people about these kind of questions, and people send me kind of all kind of cool videos and stuff. So I do really appreciate that. I don't think it's possible for me to change really because I'm not I'm not a normal person. Like I'm not normal. So even if I wanted to be different, I don't suspect I'd be successful. But even so, as I said before, I've met some really great people, both technical and otherwise. And as
Right.
I said, the experience of being able to actually go to a Grand Prix and see people in person and get a feel, you know, through first person what
Yeah.
that community is like, it is very positive, and it does change the perspective of how I view myself in that community
Yeah.
and what my responsibilities may be in terms of pushing forward and making sure things like inclusivity and pushing back racism and things like that. It's something that I take more seriously today than I have in the past. And as we said, there's been some things in the news recently about drivers using slurs and streams and
Yeah.
things,
Yeah.
and then my answer today and always is to end racism. It's just no to racism, full stop.
Facts.
But this is a community where people are subjected to things all the time that they shouldn't have to be. And the only way to fix that is through discussions and communication and dialogue. And the one thing that we cannot do is close the avenue of dialogue. And so if I can do something to help keep it open, then I'm more than happy to.
Well, Bryson, I appreciate you, brother, man. I don't think you'll change either, man. You're pretty genuine to yourself, true to yourself. And one thing I definitely like, if people had to look at this podcast, I definitely am Magneto. You definitely are Professor X. Like,
No. I got it. I got you. I'm Morpheus. I'm Morpheus.
you
That's what
Morpheus. Hey,
I'm
I
gonna get
like
the
it. I
I'm gonna
like
get the glasses. I'm already halfway there.
you are
I'll be Morpheus. I'll do
you
it.
be Morpheus. You just need the black leather jacket, man, and the cool boots.
Hey, I think I could get one too. I could probably get it. If I really I know where let's just say I know where I would go if I was gonna get a black
For
leather
real.
jacket. Yeah. All right.
That would be funny as hell.
All
If you
right.
showed up on the show one day as Morpheus, I'm done.
Halloween is coming up. We could wait. What is the Grand Prix? What is Austin? I'll show up in Austin like Morpheus.
We should see about that. We should see about that. Hey, man, as always, man, everybody, it's another Performance Talk episode. Bryson, thank you for having us back. And remember, people, if you want to become a member, hit that join button, subscribe, like, share. Bryson comes here to give us a totally different perspective, a very appreciative perspective that we always don't get. And it's very important to try to keep that balance, which is why I like to try to do that. The balance from mind, a balance from a very wonderful mind like Bryson. But you don't always have to come here. Bryson holds Twitter spaces. All right. You can go there, listen to Bryson talk fundamentally about a lot of different things that I don't know shit about, by the way. Bryson does know them. And Bryson, did you do the Discord? I know you were working on some other things you were talking about, Get Up. So let them know what you do have working, what you do have currently right now, where they can come and just join you. They don't have to come here all the time to see that.
Yeah, I do hold the odd Twitter space, not always on race weekends, but probably on off weeks. I tend to hold Twitter space, and again, oftentimes it's just free form talking about generic things, or it may be focused on something specific, like the recent technical director from the FIA on the vertical acceleration for porpoising. We do have the an F1 Tech Discord where we kind of have some people talking about technical developments in Formula One and historical developments and chassis dynamics and sims and all these kinds of fun things. I will give a link to that to Jay at the end of the podcast, and we're more than happy to have people there. But broadly speaking, it's just a community where people are asking questions and giving answers if we have them.
All right, well, there it is. So Bryson will give me that link. I will put the link in the description of this video. Also, it will be available on the podcast platforms, Podbean, Spotify, Apple. You think about it, it's probably there, and you can listen to it there. All right, so with that being said, we have come to another wonderful episode of Performance Talk. I appreciate everybody from joining us. See you later. Just build it. Peace. Thanks for tuning in and watching another video here at Wolfpack Performance. Check out some of my other content on Formula One issues, our topics, and our DIY products on how to customize your vehicle. Don't forget to comment, like, share, and subscribe. See you soon.